The dust devils swirled down Main Street in Bodie, California, on that scorching August afternoon in 1878, and Patricia Miller watched them dance through eyes that could no longer focus properly, her vision blurring at the edges as her legs finally gave out beneath her. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was the hard, packed earth rushing up to meet her face and the distant sound of horses, hooves clattering against the wooden planks of the street. Preston Parker had just emerged from the general store, his arms laden with supplies for the week ahead on his small ranch outside town, when he saw the woman collapse. Without thinking, he dropped his packages and ran toward her crumpled form, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each stride. He reached her in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her and gently turning her over. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now framed a face that was far too pale and drawn. Her dress, though clean, was patched in several places and hung loosely on her thin frame. Preston pressed his fingers against her throat, feeling for a pulse, and relief flooded through him when he found it beating steadily, if weakly. He glanced around at the crowd that was beginning to gather, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern, but no one stepped forward to help. Sliding one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees, he lifted her easily, shocked at how little she weighed, and carried her toward the nearest establishment, the Silver Dollar Saloon. The bartender, a grizzled man named Thomas who had known Preston since he first arrived in Bodie 3 years earlier, looked up in surprise as the cowboy shouldered through the swinging doors with the unconscious woman in his arms. "What happened?" Thomas asked, already moving around the bar. "Found her collapsed in the street," Preston said, his voice tight with concern. "She needs water and food. Can I use one of the back tables?" Thomas nodded quickly. "Take the one by the window. I will bring water right away." Preston carried Patricia to the indicated table and carefully set her down in one of the chairs, supporting her back with one hand while he pulled another chair close with his foot. He positioned her so she was leaning back, her head supported by the wall behind the booth. Up close, he could see the gauntness in her cheeks, the way her collarbone jutted out sharply beneath the thin fabric of her dress. This was not simple exhaustion or heat stroke. This woman was starving. Thomas appeared with a pitcher of water and a glass. "I will get some bread and broth," he said, reading Preston's thoughts. "You start with the water, but slow. Too much too fast will make her sick." Preston nodded his thanks and poured a small amount of water into the glass. He dampened his handkerchief with some of it and gently wiped her face, hoping the coolness would help revive her. After a moment, her eyelids fluttered and she made a small sound of confusion. "Easy now," Preston said softly, his voice low and reassuring. "You fainted in the street. You are safe." Patricia's eyes opened fully, and for a moment she stared at him in bewilderment. They were green, he noticed, a deep forest green that reminded him of the pine trees in the mountains. Then awareness flooded back, and with it, shame. She tried to sit up quickly, but Preston placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hold on there," he said. "You need to take this slow. When was the last time you ate something?" She turned her face away, her cheeks coloring with embarrassment despite her pallor. Yesterday morning, I think." "Some bread." Her voice was barely above a whisper, rough from thirst. Preston's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "Well, we are going to fix that right now, but first you need to drink some water. Small sips." He held the glass to her lips and she drank gratefully, though he pulled it away after a few swallows. "More in a minute," he promised. "Let that settle first." Thomas returned with a bowl of beef broth and a plate of soft bread. "Start with this," he said, setting them on the table. "I've got some stew warming up for later." Patricia looked at the food, then at Preston, confusion and wariness mingling in her expression. "I cannot pay you," she said quietly, her hands twisting in her lap. "I do not have any money." "I did not ask if you could," Preston replied firmly. He broke off a small piece of bread and dipped it in the broth, then held it out to her. "Eat. We can talk after." Pride warred with hunger in her eyes, but hunger won. She took the bread from his hand and ate it slowly, as if trying to maintain some dignity despite the circumstances. Preston watched her carefully, ready to intervene if she tried to eat too quickly. He had seen what happened to starving people when they gorged themselves, and he did not want this woman suffering any more than she already had. They continued in silence for several minutes, Preston periodically offering her sips of water between small portions of broth-soaked bread. Color was beginning to return to her cheeks, and her hands, which had been trembling when she first woke, were steadier now. Finally, when she had eaten about half of what was on the table, she pushed the bowl away slightly. "I should stop," she said. "I do not want to be sick." Preston nodded approvingly. "Smart. Rest a bit and you can have more in a while." He leaned back in his chair, studying her openly now. "I am Preston Parker. I've got a ranch about 5 miles out of town." "And you are?" "Patricia Hamilton," she said quietly, meeting his eyes for the first time with real awareness. She saw a man in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair needed a cut, falling almost to his collar, and his face was honest and open, with none of the calculation or cruelty she had grown accustomed to seeing in men's faces over the past months. "I arrived in Bodie 3 weeks ago." "From where?" Preston asked, genuinely curious. "Denver originally, but most recently from Sacramento." She hesitated, then seemed to decide that she owed him some explanation. "My father died last year. He had debts I did not know about. They took everything, the house, the business, everything. I had an aunt in Sacramento who had written to me years ago, said if I ever needed anything. But when I got there, I found she had died the previous winter." Preston's expression softened with sympathy. "And you came to Bodie looking for work." A bitter smile touched her lips. "I came to Bodie because I had enough money for a stage ticket here and nowhere else to go. I thought a boomtown would have opportunities." She looked down at her hands. "I was wrong, or perhaps just wrong about what kind of opportunities would be available to a woman alone." Preston understood immediately. Bodie was indeed full of opportunities for women, but most of them involved working in saloons or worse. For a respectable woman with no connections and no money, the options were severely limited. "What kind of work were you looking for?" "Anything honest," Patricia said simply. "I can read and write and do figures, I can sew and cook and clean, but everyone I asked said they had no positions or—" She trailed off, her expression darkening. "Or what?" Preston prompted gently. She looked at him directly, her chin lifting with defiant pride despite her circumstances. "Or they suggested I might find employment at one of the brothels, since I had the right look for it." Her voice was steady, but Preston could see the anger and hurt behind her eyes. His hands clenched into fists on the table. He knew Bodie could be rough, but the casual cruelty of it still angered him. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. "You deserved better than that." Patricia seemed surprised by his sincerity. "You are kind to say so." She glanced at the food on the table, then back at him. "And kind to help me. Thank you. I will find a way to repay you somehow." "I told you I do not need repayment," Preston said firmly. Then an idea struck him and he leaned forward slightly. "But if you are serious about wanting work, I might have a solution. I need help at my ranch." Wariness crept back into her expression. "What kind of help?" Preston could see the suspicion in her eyes and understood it. A woman in her position had to be careful. "Honest work," he said clearly. I am not a wealthy man, Miss Hamilton, but I do well enough. I raise horses, and I have got about 60 head right now, plus cattle and chickens. The house is small but sound. I am gone most days working the stock, and I come home to cold beans and a dirty house because I do not have time to keep up with everything. I need someone to cook proper meals, tend the kitchen garden, maybe help with the chickens and the milking. In exchange, you would have room and board and a small wage. Nothing improper, I give you my word. You would have your own room with a lock on the door. Patricia stared at him, trying to read his face to find the trap she was certain must be there. Why would you offer this to a complete stranger? Because you need help and I need help, Preston said simply. And because letting someone starve in the street when you have the means to prevent it is not right. He held her gaze steadily. I will not lie to you, Miss Hamilton. Bodie is full of talk and people will gossip about a woman living on a bachelor's ranch. But my reputation is solid, and I will make it clear to anyone who asks that you are my employee, nothing more. I will respect your privacy and your person, and I will expect you to do honest work in return for fair compensation. That is the offer. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Every instinct she had developed over the past month screamed at her to be cautious, to question his motives, to protect herself. But she was also practical enough to know that her options were non-existent. She could accept his offer, or she could go back to sleeping in an abandoned mining shack and slowly starving to death. And something in his eyes, some fundamental decency, made her want to trust him. I will accept your offer, she said finally, but I want to be clear about expectations. I will work hard and I will earn my keep, but if you try anything improper, I will leave immediately, no matter the consequences. Preston nodded seriously. That is fair, and I would not expect anything else. I will drive you out to the ranch after you have eaten more and rested a bit. Thomas, could we get that stew now? The bartender, who had been watching the exchange with interest from behind the bar, nodded and disappeared into the back. While they waited, Preston told Patricia about the ranch, painting a picture of the daily rhythms and work that would be expected of her. The house had a kitchen with a cast iron stove, a sitting room, 2 bedrooms, and a small root cellar. There was a well with good water, and the nearest neighbors were 2 miles away. It was isolated but not dangerously so, and Preston made regular trips to town for supplies and to sell horses. The stew arrived, rich with beef and vegetables, and Patricia ate slowly, her stomach already unaccustomed to large meals. Preston waited patiently, nursing a cup of coffee and occasionally pointing out people who passed by the window, giving her a better sense of Bodie's inhabitants. He seemed to know everyone, she noticed, and those who glanced through the window and saw him invariably waved or nodded respectfully. When she had eaten as much as she could manage, Preston settled the bill with Thomas, who gave Patricia a grandfatherly smile and told her she was welcome any time. Then Preston retrieved his abandoned packages from where someone had kindly stacked them by the general store's entrance, loaded them into his wagon, and helped Patricia up onto the seat beside him. The ride out to the ranch took about 45 minutes, following a rutted track that wound through the high desert landscape. It was still hot, but Patricia found she did not mind. She was full for the first time in days, and the hard knot of fear that had been her constant companion since arriving in Bodie had loosened slightly. She studied Preston from the corner of her eye as he drove, noting the easy way he handled the horses and the way he scanned the horizon with the practiced eye of someone who knew his land intimately. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 3 years now, Preston replied. "I came out here from Kansas after my father died. He was a farmer, but I always preferred working with horses. I had saved up some money working as a drover, and when I heard about the boom in Bodie, I figured there would be need for good horses. People are always needing mounts for mining work, transportation, everything. I bought the land cheap because it was considered too far from the main diggings, built the house myself, and started small. It has grown steadily since then. You run the whole operation yourself?" Patricia asked, impressed despite herself, mostly. "During the busy season, I hire a hand or two to help with roundup and breaking the young horses. But day to day, yes, it is just me, which is why I could use the help." He glanced at her. "I will not pretend it is easy work. The hours are long, especially during planting and harvest season for the garden, but you will not go hungry, and you will have a safe place to sleep." "That sounds like heaven to me right now," Patricia admitted quietly. Preston's expression softened. "How long had it been since you had a proper meal?" She calculated in her head. 4 days since I had anything substantial. I had been rationing the last of my money, trying to make it stretch while I looked for work. I had a bit of bread yesterday morning, but that was the last of it. I went out today to try one more time to find employment, and I suppose my body just gave out. 4 days, Preston repeated, his voice tight with anger that was not directed at her. "You could have died." "I know," Patricia said simply. "I was starting to think that might not be the worst outcome." Preston pulled the wagon to a stop so abruptly that the horses tossed their heads in surprise. He turned to face her fully. "Do not ever think that," he said forcefully. "I do not know what you have been through, but your life has value, Miss Hamilton. Do not let this world grind you down so much that you forget that." Tears sprang to Patricia's eyes, surprising her. She had not cried through any of it, not when her father died, not when she lost her home, not when she arrived in Sacramento to find her aunt dead, not even when she spent her first night sleeping on the hard ground in Bodie. But something about this man's fierce insistence that her life mattered broke through the walls she had built around herself. "I will try to remember that," she whispered. Preston held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded and urged the horses forward again. They rode in silence for a few more minutes before the ranch came into view. It was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, a large barn, and several corrals where horses grazed peacefully. The setting was beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance and the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. "It is lovely," Patricia said sincerely. Preston smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his face. "It is home. Come on, I will show you around." He helped her down from the wagon and gave her a tour of the property. The house was indeed small but solidly built, with glass windows and a proper wood floor. The kitchen was well equipped, with a good stove, shelves for storage, and even a table with 4 chairs. The sitting room held a sofa that had seen better days, a rocking chair, and a fireplace. Preston showed her the 2 bedrooms, the larger of which was clearly his, with personal items scattered about and a bed that looked comfortable if rumpled. The second bedroom was smaller, barely more than a closet with a narrow bed and a small dresser, but it had a window and was clean. "I know it is not much," Preston said, suddenly seeming embarrassed. "But the bed is good, and I can put a proper lock on the door tomorrow." "It is perfect," Patricia said, and she meant it. After sleeping on the ground or in a leaky shack, this small room seemed luxurious. "Thank you, Mr. Parker." "Preston," he corrected gently. "We are going to be working together, sharing a house. Seems silly to stand on formality." She hesitated, then nodded. "Patricia then, or Patty if you prefer." "Patricia suits you," Preston said. "It has dignity." She did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. Preston showed her where everything was in the kitchen, the pantry well stocked with staples, and explained his usual routine. He was up before dawn to tend the animals, worked until midday, came in for a meal, worked until evening, then did the final check of the stock before dark. He usually ate a quick breakfast before heading out and prepared his own simple dinner in the evenings. "Starting tomorrow, if you are up to it, you could prepare breakfast and dinner," he said. "And anything you can do to keep the house tidy would be appreciated. I will take care of the heavy work and the stock, but if you are comfortable with chickens, gathering eggs would be helpful. Same with the milk cow. I have been neglecting the kitchen garden something terrible, so anything you could do there would be wonderful." "I can do all of that," Patricia assured him. "I may be a bit slow at first while I regain my strength, but I promise I will work hard." "I know you will," Preston said. "For tonight, though, you should rest. I will make us something for dinner and you can just focus on settling in." Patricia wanted to protest, to prove that she was not weak or helpless, but her body had other ideas. The brief surge of energy from the food was fading and exhaustion was creeping back in. "If you are sure," she said hesitantly. "I am sure. Go lie down for a bit. I will call you when food is ready." Patricia retreated to her small room and sat on the bed, testing it. The mattress was thin but clean and far more comfortable than anything she had slept on in weeks. She meant to rest for just a few minutes, but the moment she lay down, sleep claimed her completely. She woke to the smell of frying bacon and the low murmur of Preston's voice as he moved around the kitchen. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to place where she was. Then memory flooded back, and she sat up quickly, mortified that she had fallen asleep when she was supposed to be proving her worth as an employee. The light coming through her small window was dimmer now, evening settling over the land. She hurried out to the kitchen, smoothing her hair and dress as best she could. Preston looked up from the stove and smiled. "Good, you are awake. I was about to call you. I hope you like bacon and eggs." "I like anything," Patricia said honestly. "I am sorry I fell asleep. I did not mean to shirk on my first day." "You fainted from starvation a few hours ago," Preston said dryly. "I think you are allowed to rest. Besides, your official first day is tomorrow. Tonight you are still a guest." He plated the food and they sat down at the kitchen table. It felt strange and intimate to Patricia, sharing a meal with a man she had only just met, but Preston kept up an easy stream of conversation that helped dispel the awkwardness. He asked about her life before the hardships, and she found herself telling him about growing up in Denver, about her father's dry goods store, and how he had taught her to read and keep accounts. She had been happy then, secure in her place in the world, never imagining how quickly it could all disappear. "He made some bad investments the year before he died," she explained, pushing the last of her eggs around her plate. "Mining stocks that went bust. He did not tell me, did not want me to worry, so when he had the heart attack, I had no idea that we were ruined. The creditors came the day after the funeral." "That is rough," Preston said quietly. "My father's death was not unexpected. He had been sick for a while, but it still felt like the ground disappearing beneath my feet. I cannot imagine dealing with that and losing everything else at the same time." "You find a way to cope because you have no choice," Patricia said. "Or at least you try to. I obviously did not do a very good job of it given how you found me." "You survived," Preston corrected firmly. "That is what matters. You kept going even when things were impossible. That takes strength." Patricia felt that strange prickling behind her eyes again and changed the subject before she could embarrass herself by crying. "Tell me about your horses." Preston's face lit up, and he launched into an enthusiastic description of his breeding program, the qualities he looked for in his stock, and his dreams for the future of the ranch. He spoke with passion and knowledge, and Patricia found herself genuinely interested. She asked questions, and he answered them, and by the time they finished eating, some of the strangeness between them had eased into something more comfortable. They cleaned up the dishes together, despite Patricia's protests that she should do it herself, and then Preston showed her where everything was for washing up. He had a small bathing room attached to the house, a luxury in such a remote location, with a large basin and a water pump. He left her to her privacy, and Patricia took advantage of the opportunity to wash properly for the first time in days, scrubbing away the dust and grime of the road. When she emerged, feeling more human than she had in weeks, she found Preston sitting on the porch, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. He glanced up as she stepped outside. "Better?" he asked. "Much," she admitted, sitting in the other chair he had placed there. "Thank you for everything. I still cannot quite believe this is real." "It is real," Preston assured her. "And tomorrow you will wake up to a sunrise over those mountains, and the day after that, and the day after that. You have a place here, Patricia, for as long as you need it." She looked at him, this strange, kind man who had pulled her from the edge of oblivion without asking for anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Truly." Preston was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkening landscape. "My mother died when I was 10, he said finally. "A fever took her quick. But before that, she was the kindest person I ever knew. She used to say that we are all just walking each other home, and when we see someone stumbling on the path, we have a duty to help them up. I guess that stuck with me." He looked at her. "And maybe I am tired of being alone out here. Maybe having someone else around will be good for both of us." "Maybe it will," Patricia agreed quietly, and they sat together in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. The next morning, Patricia woke to the sound of Preston moving quietly through the house, trying not to disturb her. She quickly dressed and hurried out to find him pulling on his boots by the front door. "You should have woken me," she said. "I could have had breakfast ready." "It is barely past 5, Preston said, looking surprised to see her up. "I did not expect you to be working full days immediately." "If I am going to do this job, I might as well start properly," Patricia replied firmly. "Go do whatever you need to do. I will have breakfast ready when you are done with the first round of chores." Preston looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him that she needed this, needed to prove to herself and to him that she was capable. He nodded. "All right. I will be back in about an hour." Patricia explored the kitchen more thoroughly, familiarizing herself with where everything was stored and what supplies were available. She found flour, salt, baking powder, and lard, enough to make biscuits. There were eggs from the henhouse, kept cool in a crock, and more bacon in the larder. Coffee beans sat in a tin, and she found a grinder and got to work. By the time Preston returned, tracking in a bit of mud that he hastily tried to wipe away, the kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and baking biscuits. He stopped in the doorway, his expression almost comically surprised. "How did you manage all this?" "It is just biscuits and bacon," Patricia said, though she could not help feeling pleased by his reaction. "Nothing fancy." "It is more than I have had in months," Preston said, sitting down at the table with obvious anticipation. She served him a full plate, and the appreciative sounds he made as he ate were deeply satisfying. When he reached for his third biscuit, she allowed herself a small smile. "These are incredible," he said with his mouth half full, then swallowed and looked embarrassed. "Sorry. I guess I am eating like I was raised in a barn." "You are eating like someone who is hungry and happy with the food," Patricia corrected gently. "That is a compliment to the cook." They fell into a pattern over the following days. Patricia would rise early to make breakfast, then tend to the chickens and the milk cow while Preston handled the heavier stock work. She would work in the kitchen garden, coaxing the neglected vegetables back to life, and prepare a midday meal for when Preston came in from the fields. In the afternoons, she would clean, mend clothing, or do whatever other household tasks needed attention, and then prepare dinner. The work was constant but satisfying, and more importantly, she felt safe for the first time in months. Preston was unfailingly respectful, never entering her room without permission, and maintaining a careful distance that made it clear he intended to honor his promise. He was also surprisingly easy to talk to. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would often sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. He told her stories about breaking horses and the characters who came through looking to buy stock. She told him about books she had read and places she hoped to someday see. A week passed, then two. Patricia could feel her strength returning as regular meals filled out her too thin frame. The haunted look faded from her eyes, replaced by something brighter. Preston noticed the changes, though he did not comment directly. Instead, he simply smiled more, his pleasure in having her there evident in the way he looked forward to coming home each day. On a Saturday morning 3 weeks after Patricia's arrival, Preston announced that he needed to go into Bodie for supplies and to deliver a horse he had sold to one of the mine foremen. "Would you like to come along?" he asked. "You have been working hard. A change of scenery might be nice." Patricia hesitated. Part of her wanted to never see Bodie again, to forget those desperate weeks when she had wandered its streets looking for help that never came. But another part of her recognized that she could not hide forever. "All right," she said. "I would like that." The ride into town was pleasant, and Patricia found herself noticing things she had missed before, the way the light caught on the mountains, the small ranch houses scattered across the landscape, the sense of life and possibility that hung in the air. When they reached Bodie, Preston helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm, a gesture that surprised her but that she accepted after a moment's hesitation. They walked down the main street together, and Patricia became aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Preston seemed unconcerned, nodding politely to those they passed and occasionally stopping to exchange greetings with someone he knew. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Crawford, studied Patricia with open curiosity. "This is Miss Patricia Hamilton," Preston said smoothly. "She is working at my ranch managing the household. Miss Hamilton, this is Mrs. Crawford." "How do you do?" Patricia said, offering her hand. Mrs. Crawford shook it somewhat reluctantly. "Working at the ranch, you say, as a housekeeper?" "That is correct," Patricia replied evenly, hearing the judgment in the other woman's tone. "I see." Mrs. Crawford's expression suggested she saw quite a lot, none of it proper. Preston's jaw tightened, and he placed a gentle but proprietary hand on Patricia's elbow. "Miss Hamilton has been invaluable," he said firmly. "Best decision I ever made bringing her on. Now I need to settle my account and place an order for next week." They conducted their business, and as they left the store, Patricia could feel her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. "You were right about the gossip," she said quietly. "People always find something to talk about," Preston replied, his voice tight. "It does not matter what they think. You and I know the truth." They completed the rest of their errands, and Patricia noticed that not everyone was like Mrs. Crawford. Thomas at the Silver Dollar greeted her warmly and asked how she was settling in. The young clerk at the feed store smiled at her shyly and complimented her dress, even though it was the same patched garment she had been wearing the day she fainted. And several of the other ranchers who knew Preston made a point of being introduced to her, their manner respectful and friendly. On the way home, Patricia was quiet, processing the experience. Finally, she said, "Does it bother you, what people might be saying?" Preston was silent for a moment, guiding the horses around a particularly rough section of road. "It bothers me that anyone would think poorly of you when you have done nothing wrong," he said finally. "But as for my reputation, I stopped worrying too much about what people think a long time ago. I know my character, and the people whose opinions matter know it too." "I do not want to cause problems for you," Patricia said. "If this arrangement is going to damage your standing in the community, it is not," Preston interrupted firmly. "And even if it were, that would be my choice to make, not yours. You need a place to stay and work to do. I need help on the ranch. We have a practical arrangement that benefits both of us, and anyone with sense can see that." He glanced at her. "Unless you are uncomfortable. If you want to find something else, I will understand." "No," Patricia said quickly. "I do not want to leave. I just wanted to make sure you were all right with how things are." "I am more than all right," Preston said, and there was something in his voice that made Patricia's heart beat a little faster. "These past weeks have been some of the best I have had since coming to California." Patricia felt warmth spread through her chest. "They have been good for me too," she admitted softly. Something shifted between them after that day. The careful distance Preston had maintained began to close, not dramatically but in small increments. He started lingering longer over meals, clearly enjoying not just the food but the conversation. He brought her small gifts from his trips to town: a hair ribbon, a book he thought she might enjoy, a bag of peppermint candies. When they sat on the porch in the evenings, their chairs seemed to move incrementally closer together. Patricia felt herself responding in kind. She paid more attention to her appearance, taking extra care with her hair and mending her dresses to look their best. She learned his favorite foods and made sure to prepare them regularly. She found herself watching for his return from the fields, her heart lifting when she saw him riding back toward the house. One evening in early October, about 6 weeks after Patricia had arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set when Preston suddenly said, "I need to be honest with you about something." Patricia's heart clenched with sudden fear. "What is it?" Preston turned to look at her fully, his expression serious. "When I offered you this job, I meant everything I said. I needed help and you needed a place to stay. It was a practical arrangement and I had no ulterior motives." "I know that," Patricia said, confused about where this was going. "But things have changed," Preston continued. "At least for me. I find myself looking forward to seeing you every day. I think about you when I am out working. I like the sound of your voice and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I enjoy every moment we spend together, and I do not want to just be your employer anymore." Patricia's breath caught in her throat. "Preston, I am not asking you to feel the same way," he interrupted gently. "And I am not going to pressure you or make things awkward. If you want to keep things as they are, we will do that. But I could not keep pretending that my feelings are purely professional when they are not. You deserve honesty." Patricia stared at him, her mind racing. She should be cautious, she knew. She should protect herself. She had been through so much, and trusting someone with her heart after losing everything seemed terrifying. But as she looked at Preston's open, honest face, at this man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, who had treated her with unfailing respect and kindness, she realized that caution was not what she felt. "I think about you too," she said softly. "I tell myself I should not, that it is foolish to develop feelings for my employer, but I cannot seem to help it. You make me feel safe and valued and cared for, and I have not felt those things in so long." Preston's face broke into a wide smile. "So I am not alone in this." "You are not alone," Patricia confirmed, smiling back at him. "Can I court you properly then?" Preston asked. "Not as an employer and employee, but as a man interested in a woman." "Yes," Patricia said, feeling something bright and warm unfurl in her chest. "I would like that very much." Preston reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. They sat like that as the last of the sunlight faded, neither of them speaking, just enjoying the simple pleasure of acknowledged connection. The courting that followed was sweet and tentative. Preston made it clear that Patricia was no longer just his employee, but someone he cared for deeply. He still paid her wages, insisting that her work deserved compensation regardless of their personal relationship, but the dynamic between them shifted. He started calling her Patty in private, the nickname an endearment. She called him Prees when they were alone, enjoying the intimacy of the shortened name. They went on proper outings when time allowed. Preston took her into the mountains to see the aspen trees turning gold. They had picnics by a nearby stream, Patricia bringing food she had prepared and Preston teaching her about the wildlife and landscape. He was courting her as thoroughly and properly as any woman had ever been courted, despite their isolated circumstances. In November, Preston made another trip to Bodie and returned with a large package wrapped in brown paper. He presented it to Patricia after dinner, looking almost nervous. "I hope this is not too forward," he said, "but winter is coming and I noticed your dresses are getting thin." Patricia unwrapped the package to find 3 new dresses, one for everyday wear, one for Sunday best, and one in a deep green that matched her eyes. There was also a warm wool shawl and a new pair of boots. She looked up at him, tears threatening. "This is too much." "It is not enough," Preston said firmly. "You deserve nice things, Patty. Let me give them to you." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, the first time she had initiated such contact. "Thank you," she whispered against his skin. Preston turned his head slightly so their lips met, a gentle kiss that spoke of possibility and promise. When they pulled apart, he was smiling. "I am courting you with the intention of marrying you," he said bluntly. "I want you to know that. I am not playing games or passing time. I want you to be my wife if you will have me." "I want that too," Patricia said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "But are you sure? We have only known each other a few months." "I have never been more sure of anything," Preston replied. "I know you are the person I want to share my life with. I know you are strong and kind and brave. I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I know that this ranch became a home the day you arrived. That is enough for me." Patricia felt tears spill over, but they were happy tears. "Then yes, I will marry you." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and they stood in the kitchen, wrapped around each other, letting the reality of their commitment settle over them. "I will do right by you," Preston murmured into her hair. "I promise you that. You will never go hungry or be afraid or be alone again." "I know," Patricia said, because she did. Whatever else life might bring, she trusted this man completely. They were married in December. A small ceremony in Bodie with Thomas the bartender and a few of Preston's rancher friends as witnesses. Patricia wore the green dress Preston had bought her, and he wore a new shirt and vest he had ordered specially for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Patricia with gentle reverence, as if she were something precious and fragile. The gossips had a field day, of course. Mrs. Crawford made pointed comments about hasty marriages and improper situations. But for every disapproving whisper, there was someone else who smiled at the newlyweds and wished them well. Thomas gave them a toast at the Silver Dollar and insisted that the drinks were on the house. The young clerk from the feed store shyly congratulated Patricia and told her she looked beautiful. The ride back to the ranch, their ranch now, truly was filled with quiet happiness. When they arrived home, Preston carried Patricia over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. He set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said, the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. "I love you so much, Patty." "I love you too," Patricia replied, feeling the truth of it resonate through her entire being. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone." Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Preston patient and careful with her, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in Preston's bed, their bed now, Patricia thought about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been on the verge of giving up, broken by loss and hardship and the casual cruelty of the world. Now she was lying in the arms of a good man who loved her, in a home that was hers, with a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking about the day I fainted in the street," Patricia said. "How I thought it might be the end of everything, and how it turned out to be the beginning instead." Preston tightened his arms around her. "Best day of my life finding you. Even though I was half dead and filthy and desperate, especially then," Preston said seriously. "Because I got to see how strong you really are, how you pulled yourself together and kept fighting. That takes courage, Patty. You are the bravest person I know." "I do not feel very brave," Patricia admitted. "I feel lucky. Lucky that you were the one who found me. Lucky that you are the kind of man who would help a stranger. Lucky that you saw something worth loving in me." "There is everything worth loving in you," Preston said firmly. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, warm and safe and home. The winter that followed was cold but happy. Patricia reveled in the simple domesticity of married life, in having a partner to share the daily rhythms of ranch work. She and Preston worked together seamlessly, their different skills complementing each other. Preston handled the stock and the heavy labor, while Patricia managed the household and helped with the smaller tasks. But they also helped each other, Preston teaching Patricia about the horses, and Patricia teaching Preston to cook more than just basic trail food. In February, Patricia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally told Preston, watching his face transform with joy and wonder made it real. "A baby," he kept saying, touching her still flat stomach with reverent hands. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Patricia asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "I am beyond happy," Preston said, pulling her into a careful embrace. "I feel like the luckiest man alive. A beautiful wife and a child on the way. What more could anyone ask for?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Patricia continued her work around the ranch through the spring and into the summer, though Preston became increasingly protective, insisting she not overdo it. He took over more of her tasks as her belly grew, and Patricia found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, though she appreciated his concern. They made preparations for the baby, Preston building a cradle during the long evenings, and Patricia sewing tiny gowns and blankets. They talked about names and argued playfully about whether the child would have Preston's blue eyes or Patricia's green ones. They were building a life together, and the baby growing inside Patricia was a symbol of everything they had created from the ashes of their previous hardships. In September, a full year after Patricia had fainted in the streets of Bodie, she went into labor. Preston rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, a competent woman named Sarah who arrived with her bag of supplies and a calm, reassuring manner. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Preston refused to leave Patricia's side, holding her hand and wiping her brow and whispering encouragement even when she screamed at him that this was all his fault. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn blue like his father's. Patricia held him for the first time, exhausted and overwhelmed and more deeply in love than she had ever imagined possible. "A son," Preston said, his voice choked with emotion as he touched the baby's tiny hand. "We have a son, Patty. What should we name him?" Patricia asked, unable to look away from the perfect little face. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months but had never quite settled on one. Now, holding their child, Preston said, "What about Michael? After your father," Patricia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. She had told Preston about her father during one of their long evening talks, about how much she had loved him and how his death had started the chain of events that had led her to Bodie. The idea that Preston would want to honor that memory moved her deeply. "Michael Preston Parker," she said. "It is perfect." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, of learning to be parents and marveling at every tiny thing their son did. Preston was a devoted father, walking the floor with Michael when he cried at night and changing diapers without complaint. He spoke to the baby constantly, telling him about the horses and the ranch and all the things they would do together when Michael was older. Patricia watched her husband with their son and felt her love for him deepen even further. This was the man who had saved her life, who had given her a home and his heart, and now he was giving their child the same unwavering devotion. She felt blessed beyond measure. As Michael grew, the ranch prospered. Preston's reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and he was able to expand his operation, hiring a permanent hand to help with the increased workload. This gave him more time to spend with his family, and he made the most of it, teaching Michael to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk and involving him in every aspect of ranch life. Patricia found herself settling into the rhythms of their life with deep contentment. She maintained her household duties, but also became more involved in the business side of the ranch, keeping the books and handling correspondence with buyers. She discovered she had a head for figures and enjoyed the challenge of managing their growing enterprise. When Michael was 3, Patricia found herself pregnant again. This time, it was easier in some ways. She knew what to expect, and Preston was less frantically worried but harder in others, as she was chasing after an active toddler while dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion. Their daughter was born in the spring, a relatively easy labor that had Sarah the midwife commenting on how much smoother second births usually were. They named her Margaret Helen Parker, after Preston's mother and Patricia's aunt, the one who had died before Patricia could reach her. She had Patricia's green eyes and auburn hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped completely around her tiny finger. Life settled into a new normal with 2 children. Michael was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and appointed himself her protector. Preston added on to the house, building another bedroom and expanding the sitting room. The ranch continued to grow, and with it, their security and prosperity. The people of Bodie, who had once gossiped about the impropriety of Patricia living on Preston's ranch as an unmarried woman, now saw them as a respectable family, pillars of the small ranching community outside town. Patricia developed friendships with other ranch wives, and Preston became known as someone who could be counted on to help neighbors in need. They hosted gatherings at their ranch, barn dances and holiday celebrations, and their home became known as a welcoming place. But for all the social connections they built, it was the quiet moments as a family that Patricia treasured most. Evenings on the porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. Sunday mornings when they all piled into the wagon to go to church in town. The sound of Preston's voice as he told the children stories before bed. The feeling of his arms around her at night, solid and safe. One evening, when Michael was 7 and Margaret was 4, Preston and Patricia sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. It had been a long day, full of the usual chaos of family life, but now the ranch was quiet, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. "You ever think about that day?" Preston asked suddenly. Patricia did not need to ask which day he meant. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Usually when I am tucking the children in or when we are all sitting at the dinner table. I think about how close I came to not having any of this." "I think about it too," Preston said. "I think about what my life would have been like if I had gone to a different store that day, or if I had been 5 minutes later. I would have missed you. I would have missed all of this." Patricia reached over and took his hand. "But you did not miss me. You were exactly where you were supposed to be, exactly when you were supposed to be there." "Do you believe that?" Preston asked. "That it was meant to be?" "I do," Patricia said firmly. "I think we were meant to find each other. All the terrible things that happened, losing my father, losing my home, ending up in Bodie with nothing at all, led me to you. And I would go through it all again if this was where it brought me." Preston lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I would have found you anyway," he said. "Somehow, someway, I would have found you. You are the other half of my soul, Patty. I knew it the moment I saw you, even covered in dust and unconscious." Patricia teased gently. "Even then," Preston said seriously. "Especially then. You needed me, and I needed you, and everything else just fell into place." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the night deepen around them. Finally, Patricia said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For carrying me to your table," Patricia said softly, referencing that first day, "and to your heart." Preston turned to her, his expression tender. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for building this life with me, for giving me children and a home and a reason to wake up happy every morning. You are everything to me, Patty. Everything." They kissed, a gentle affirmation of everything they meant to each other, and then sat together watching the stars, content in their shared silence. Years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joys and challenges. There were hard winters when the stock suffered and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, normal hazards of ranch life. There were disagreements and frustrations, because no marriage is without conflict. But through it all, Preston and Patricia faced everything together, their bond deepening with each passing year. When Michael was 15, he began taking on more responsibility around the ranch, working alongside his father with the horses, and proving to have inherited Preston's skill with the animals. Margaret was 12, and like her mother, she had a sharp mind for figures and helped Patricia with the ranch accounts. They were good children, growing into capable young adults, and Preston and Patricia were proud of them. In the evenings, when the day's work was done, Preston and Patricia still found time to sit on the porch together. It was their ritual, their moment of peace and connection at the end of each day. Sometimes they talked about the children or the ranch or the wider world. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. One such evening, when they were in their early 40s and had been married for over 2 decades, Patricia looked at Preston and was struck by how much and how little had changed. His hair was graying at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But his smile was the same, warm and genuine, and his eyes still lit up when he looked at her. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "I am just thinking about how lucky I am," Patricia said. "How lucky we both are." "The luckiest," Preston agreed. He pulled her close, and she settled against his side, her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me once, about how fainting that day turned out to be a beginning instead of an ending?" I remember, Patricia said. I have been thinking about that, Preston said. About beginnings and endings. And I realize that with you, there are no endings. Just new beginnings, one after another. Each day is a new start, a new chance to love you and build our life together. That is beautiful, Pries, Patricia said softly. You make me poetic, Preston teased, but there was truth in it too. She brought out the best in him, always had. They watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear Michael calling in the horses for the night and Margaret singing to herself in her room. The ranch that Preston had built alone was now filled with life and love and purpose, all because he had been in the right place at the right time to catch a falling woman and carry her home. I love you, Patricia murmured. I love you too, Preston replied. Forever. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they sat together, two souls who had found each other against all odds, grateful for every moment of the life they had built. The cowboy and the woman he had carried to his table and his heart, bound together by love and fate, and the simple grace of being in the right place at the right time. The years continued their steady march forward, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. Michael eventually married a kind young woman from town, a rancher's daughter named Sarah who fit seamlessly into their family. They built a small house on the far edge of the property, starting their own life while remaining part of the ranch operation. Within a few years, Michael and Sarah had given Preston and Patricia 2 grandchildren, twin boys who were absolute terrors and completely adored. Margaret, more independent and scholarly than her brother, surprised everyone by announcing her intention to go to San Francisco to study bookkeeping and business. Patricia and Preston supported her decision, though it was hard to let her go. She wrote regularly, filling her letters with descriptions of city life that both fascinated and bewildered them. Eventually, she met and married a banker, a good man who respected her intelligence and ambition. They settled in Sacramento, close enough for regular visits, and presented Preston and Patricia with a granddaughter who had Patricia's green eyes and serious demeanor. Preston and Patricia moved into their later years with grace, their love for each other undiminished by time. Preston's back ached more than it used to, and Patricia needed spectacles for her close work, but they remained active and engaged in ranch life. They gradually turned over more responsibilities to Michael, trusting him to carry forward what they had built, but they still contributed where they could. On quiet evenings, they still sat on the porch, though now there was often a grandchild or two playing in the yard, filling the air with laughter and shouts. Preston would hold Patricia's hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin, and they would talk about the day or share comfortable silence. "You have any regrets?" Patricia asked one evening when they were in their 60s. It was a question that had occurred to her as she reflected on the long arc of their life together. Preston was quiet for a moment, considering seriously. "No major regrets," he said finally. "Small things, maybe. Times I lost my temper or worked too hard and missed moments with the children. But nothing that changed the essential shape of our life." "What about you?" "The same," Patricia said. "Small regrets about moments I would handle differently if I could do them over. But the big things? No, I would not change anything about the path that led me to you. Even the hard parts." Preston asked gently. "Losing your father, the poverty, fainting in the street, even those," Patricia confirmed. "They made me who I am. They brought me here, and here is exactly where I want to be." Preston lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture he had made countless times over the decades, but which never failed to make her heart warm. "Here is exactly where I want you to be too." They grew old together, their love deepening and mellowing like fine wine. Preston's hair went completely white and Patricia's auburn turned to silver. They moved a little slower, tired a little easier, but their spirits remained strong. They took joy in their grandchildren, in watching the ranch continue to thrive under Michael's management, in the visits from Margaret and her family. When Preston was 72, he suffered a mild stroke that left him weakened but alive. Patricia nursed him through the recovery with fierce determination, refusing to let him give up even on the hardest days. He regained most of his strength, though he walked with a cane now and needed afternoon rests. But he recovered, and they had more years together, precious years that they did not take for granted. Patricia's health remained stronger, and she became Preston's primary caregiver in his later years, a role she accepted without complaint. He had carried her when she needed it most, and now she would carry him through whatever remained of their journey together. One spring evening, when Preston was 78 and Patricia was 76, they sat on the porch as the sun set. The ritual had never changed, even after all these years. Preston was in his rocking chair, a blanket over his legs despite the mild temperature, and Patricia sat beside him, holding his hand. "This is a good life," Preston said softly, looking out over the ranch he had built, now thriving under the third generation of Parkers. "Better than I ever imagined it could be." "It is," Patricia agreed. "We have been very blessed." "I was thinking today," Preston said, "about that afternoon in Bodie, about seeing you fall and running to catch you. It was the best decision I ever made, picking you up and bringing you home." "The best decision you ever made was being the kind of man who would do that," Patricia corrected gently. "Your kindness saved my life, Pries. Your goodness gave me everything." "You gave me everything," Preston countered. "Purpose and love and a family and a home that was more than just a house." "You made me complete, Patty." They sat quietly for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors one more time. Finally, Preston spoke again, his voice contemplative. "I am not afraid, you know, of whatever comes next. We have had such a good run, you and I, more than most people get. But I am not ready to go yet because I am not ready to leave you." "Then do not," Patricia said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Stay right here with me for as long as you can." "I will," Preston promised. "As long as I possibly can," and he did. Preston lived another 6 years, gradually declining but never losing his essential self. Patricia stayed by his side, and their children and grandchildren visited regularly, filling their home with life and love. On a quiet morning in early summer, just before dawn, Preston passed away peacefully in his sleep, with Patricia lying beside him as she had for nearly 60 years. The grief was profound but not bitter. Patricia mourned the loss of her partner, her other half, but she also felt gratitude for the extraordinary life they had shared. They had beaten the odds, two people who might so easily have missed each other but who had instead found a love that lasted a lifetime. At Preston's funeral, attended by what seemed like half the county, Patricia stood beside the grave with dry eyes and a steady voice. She had cried her tears in private, and now she wanted to honor her husband's memory with strength. Michael spoke about his father's integrity and kindness. Margaret spoke about the lessons he had taught them about love and commitment. And Patricia, at the end, simply said, "He was the best man I ever knew, and loving him was the greatest privilege of my life." Afterward, as people offered their condolences, Patricia felt at peace. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she knew it. The pain of loss was the price of love, and she would pay it willingly for what she and Preston had shared. Patricia lived another 7 years after Preston's death, remaining active and engaged despite her advancing age. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down stories of the early days and the building of the ranch. She maintained her sharp mind and her sense of humor, and she made sure that Preston's legacy was properly remembered. On the anniversary of the day she had fainted in Bodie Street, a date she always remembered, Patricia would sit on the porch and think about the journey her life had taken. She would remember the desperation and fear of those dark days, and then she would remember Preston's face as he knelt beside her, the concern in his blue eyes, the gentleness of his hands as he lifted her. She would remember the first meal he bought her, the first night in the little bedroom, the gradual unfurling of trust and affection. She would remember their wedding day, the births of their children, the thousand small moments that had made up their life together, and she would feel grateful. Grateful for every moment, every memory, every year they had been given together. When Patricia was 89, she died peacefully in her sleep, in the bedroom she had shared with Preston for so many years. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her in her final days, and her last words were about Preston. "Tell him I am coming home," she whispered to Margaret, who held her hand as she slipped away. They buried Patricia next to Preston, under a large oak tree on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstones were simple but eloquent. Preston Parker, 1850–1934, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he carried her to his table, and his heart, Patricia Hamilton Parker, 1852–1941, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she found home in his arms. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, and the story of Preston and Patricia became family legend. Their great-grandchildren would gather on the porch on summer evenings and ask to hear about the day Grandpa Preston found Grandma Patty collapsed in the street, how he carried her home and fell in love with her, how they built a life and a family from nothing but hard work and devotion to each other. Their story became a testament to the transformative power of compassion and love, a reminder that the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that sometimes the end of one story is really just the beginning of something infinitely better. Preston and Patricia had lived and loved and built something lasting, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of kindness, commitment, and the unshakable belief that love, when it is real and true, can overcome anything.